welcome and thank you for attending this session. It really, truly is an honor to be here to learn with you over this tremendous event. One of my favorite quotes is, when one person teaches, two people learn. And I enjoy coming to these events and getting to speak, mainly because I get to learn from you and get feedback from you and test these ideas. And I just want to quickly thank all of the people that have put this conference together. What a tremendous event, a wonderful group of people, particularly Andrew Eade for inviting me out here. And also, I just want to acknowledge, really what I'm going to share with you is a compilation of what I've learned and observed over my whole life really, but mostly the last 20, 25 years, working with diverse groups of people all over the world. And so I'm not really going to present anything that's too original. It's more a compilation of the best things I've found and try to put them in a simple, digestible package for us. And so I want to acknowledge the people that I've worked with most closely at the University, Fresno State, my colleagues there, and of course, Human Kinetics publishers, been phenomenal, and Be Like Coach, a nonprofit in the U.S. Aimed at improving the quality of coaching in sport. And of course, Dr. Gilbert, my wife, who's here with me today, helping so I can test my ideas on her. But we're all coached. I'm coached every day, just like you, and I want to make sure these people recognize their contributions. So this is going to be, the way I've organized it is around this idea of culture, and not from a sociological perspective, as you've heard a little bit already at the conference, but more really from environmental. So what does the environment look like in great organizations, great schools, great teams, great hospitals? And what are those common principles, and how can we use them to build cultures of continuous improvement and excellence? And I'm involved in a project right now with some of the best coaches of all time in one of the major sports in North America. And I was reading one of the transcripts just about a week ago, and this quote just jumped off the page at me because this really captures it. This is a quote from a coach that won the national championship this year, and describing the moments in the locker room in the championship game. And it was a very challenging game, lots of adversity, and they end up winning. And this quote says it all for me. You know, our culture helped us win the game. So the culture is really the everyday things that we do, the environment, and the environment trumps individual behavior, intentions, and motivation. If you create the right environment, we're like water in a sense, right? We'll adapt to the container that we're poured into. So we create the right environment, and the behaviors will follow. So I love this example. So really the purpose today, what I'd like to share with you is evidence-based principles for creating cultures of continuous improvement and competitive excellence. And it's important that it's evidence-based. So I spend my time roughly equally between doing research, reading research, reviewing research, and in the field, coaching, working with coaches, trying to make sense of these ideas and apply them and see what really works. And some of the things or events that have really helped shape what I'm about to share with you cut across lots of different, all different domains and disciplines, and all different levels of sport, and all different sports, and from little kids and youth all the way through to Olympic and world champions. And these are just some examples, and plus my role as editor of the International Sport Coaching Journal, which I encourage you to check out online. You can see here we have phenomenal research and applied papers that we're publishing at the moment, I think, and I'm going to feature some of them today. And I like to use this image to kind of set the tone for what I'm going to share with you. This is an aerial shot of a neighborhood in Phoenix, Arizona, in the United States. And what often happens, and I see this all the time, we get very immersed in our own work, and we fail to see patterns. So if we only read our particular sports coaching journal, or we only interact with people in our sport, we really miss the opportunity to see these principles. So if we're on street level, for example, if we're on street level, we're not going to see this pattern, right? But when we do a flyover, it's very obvious that there's some common principles, and there's a very clear pattern here. So this is kind of a 40,000-foot flyover approach that we're going to take today. And these are the 4 principles that I want to share, and I was having a good discussion last night with some other people here, and The way you adapt these principles is up to you. But these principles work, and they cut across everything I've read, and I'll show, and people I've worked with in lots of different fields. And so what I'm going to do is I'm going to walk through each one of these 4, and I'll show you some real examples of these in action. I'll show you the science, some of what I think is the best science behind this, and then also some of the things I'm doing to use these principles and test them in action. And I've given versions of this talk all over the world, and it's really, I found that it resonates. You know, these are almost, I want to say, timeless principles in a sense. So the first one that we're going to look at is core values. And you've heard a little bit about core values already in other talks while you've been here. But the way we might define core values are enduring standards. So standards that govern how we behave and what matters to us. Put simply, what matters to us and how do we behave in this environment. We might call these core values. And one of the core values that you're hearing more and more about now around the world in coaching at all levels is this idea, you just heard it this morning in the session, the athlete-centered coaching approach, or needs-based coaching approach, or holistic coaching. But really what it gets down to is you coach people, right? You coach people, not sport. People first and then sport, in a sense. This is an image of Erkka Westerlund. He's the national team coach in Finland, ice hockey team. Great success at World Championships and also at the Olympics. And I actually heard him speak just recently, and he came out and he's coached for over 40 years. And he said, the one thing I've learned over all these years is you coach people first. Coach the person. Makes sense, doesn't it? And then this summer, this is an image of Jill Ellis, the women's national team coach of the United States soccer team. Won the World Cup in Canada this past summer. Also very successful at the collegiate level. And for her, again, you see the same idea, the same theme. Coach people. You coach people first, sports second. And of course, you have it here. You live it and you've heard it many times. Better people make better All Blacks. It's this idea of coaching people, right? And you may have seen this book, James Kerr wrote this book, Legacy. And I'll try to do this throughout the talk, also kind of highlight some of the key readings that I think you might enjoy and that I found coaches enjoy reading. And this other one is an image of a research paper that was done specifically on core values for the All Blacks. And there's really not much research in sport and coaching on core values. We talk about it a lot, but there's very few research studies. But this is one, and it just came out recently, and it really emphasizes these things that we're talking about. But if you want to get into the research behind it and why it matters and how it really works, this is some of the best research I found related to core values. And it's from the business world. And you may have seen these. There's Jim Collins and Jerry Porras. Jim Collins was a former professor, business professor at Stanford University. And what he did is he studied great companies, because companies have a lifespan just like anything else. Some companies endure, some die, and some succeed indefinitely. So what's the separator between these organizations, these cultures, and core values, having a very clear sense of our core values and what matters to us and how we behave in this environment is a separator. That's a key separator. And you may, for example, Apple right now. So Steve Jobs was the innovator, was the visionary behind the company. It'll be interesting to see how Apple endures or evolves without their leader and their visionary in place. Will the core values still remain? For the best companies, it does. And these are some examples. And what you see with core values, it's really this idea of having stable core values that also allow you to be flexible and open to change. And this is what you have with the All Blacks also, but you see this with all great organizations. So there's some non-negotiables. There's some things that are not up for discussion. And they're not tied to a leader. Alex Ferguson, Manchester United. They're not his values, they're Manchester United values. Ideally, this is what you want to do, right? So when leaders move on, you still have the core values. But you have to be ready and willing to adapt with your strategies, but they still need to be aligned with your core values. And a way to think about this in coaching is to make sure that the values are aligned. And you heard Steve Hansen talk about alignment. alignment with your core values. So you start with your core values. You come into your coaching with things that you value, things that matter to you, but they need to be aligned with your athletes' values. And then together you can create shared values. And that's a hallmark of a great organization, shared our values. But all of us need to have some ownership of that experience. And I want to show you an example of that in action, a great example, I think. A few years back, it was actually 2004 in the Summer Olympics, the U.S. basketball team, men's basketball team, played Puerto Rico. And if you follow basketball or sport, the U.S. is generally pretty good in basketball, and they pretty much expect to win every time they play, kind of like the All Blacks, I guess you could say. And at the time, the U.S. had 316 million people. Puerto Rico had 3.6 million. In fact, at last statistic I saw, the United States had over 25 million registered basketball players, people who played organized basketball, playing against a little country, 3.5 million people. We all know the outcome of that game, right? Well, in fact, Puerto Rico beat the U.S. by almost 20 points in the Olympics. And this is an image of the bench near the end of the game, some of the U.S. players. And that was a real turning point for USA basketball because they relied on showing up. We got the best players in the world. We show up. We're going to win. We expect to win, right? But there's no alignment. There was no understanding. There was no articulation of why are we playing? What are the core values that drive this effort, right? And that was a turning point because after that, we had USA Basketball decided to hire this coach, Mike Krzyzewski. And at that, the first thing he did when he came on board was identify standards and core values and then work with his athletes to create shared core values, because he understood the values will drive the behaviors and sustain the motivation and the effort. And you see a quote here from him: standards are the things that you do all the time and the things for which you hold one another accountable. All right? So the exercise that he went through, and this is a great book if you haven't read this, and I really like this book because it's written in moments. Oftentimes you get biographies or textbooks or autobiographies, for example, that take you through a coach's life. But this is a very simple series of moments from when he took over the team, the national team, to when they won their first Olympic gold medal at the 2008 Olympics under his direction. And it shows you how he identified and built the core values with his team and how he was able to get them to buy into those core values. He started with what matters to me. Then he met individually with some of the leaders, Kobe Bryant, LeBron James. What do you think of these ideas? What are your values? What are you hearing from your teammates? Then he met with the team. And in fact, he made sure that Kobe Bryant and LeBron James were on board with him. There was alignment between him and the leaders so that when he met with the team, the message was coming from their peer leaders, not from him. All right? Then we get to what matters to us. And I show you, he had many more. He had a full page of core values. But these are some of the core values. And the reason I share this with you is because it's not a mission statement, right? We all have mission statements, but nobody uses them. Nobody knows. I work with programs and teams all the time. You have a mission statement. I think there's one on our website somewhere. It doesn't guide behavior, right? It's kind of a dream or a hope. These are behaviors. And that's why, like when I work with coaches, they say, well, integrity or respect. Okay, what does respect look like? Put it in a definition. When you do this, this is respect. Okay, what does it look like? So this is an example of some of the core values and what they look like in action. And they've been unbeatable since they went through these activities. And he actually uses, he brought that with him from his job as a college coach at Duke University, where he's won 5 national championships. And he also, in that book, lists all the standards that he has developed with his team at Duke University. Same idea. So when you think of core values, think enduring standards that are, in many senses, non-negotiable, but they're flexible in a sense, depending on the team that you're working with, right? Year by year, perhaps. And we're going to take a little break at the end of each of these principles to reflect in line with what we're trying to accomplish with this event. So I'm going to give you 2 minutes to speak with the people around you related to this question. Because we say, oh, I know what my core values are. Respect is really important, punctuality or whatever it might be. If I came out to one of your practices or one of your training sessions, would I be able to see your core values? So if after your practice session, would I be able to write down what I think your core values are? Would they be evident in what you do and what your athletes do? So we'll take 2 minutes on that. Okay, thank you. So we can bring it back in and we'll keep moving. Another question I sometimes ask coaches is, if I went and asked your athletes, would they be able to tell me what your core values are? I think so, maybe. Which athlete? So, well, it should be tattooed on every one of their brains. They should be able to recite those, live those, know what they look like, hold each other accountable to those. That's what the best teams do, right? Collective accountability. Accountability for what? For core values and standards. The second one that I want to share with you is personal mastery. So the first one is, why are we doing what we do and what really matters to us, right? Because we all want to win. Winning is a given. Everybody strives to win. So what else is really driving us? And the second principle would be what I refer to as personal mastery. And there's a lot of information related to this. And the way I define this would be the self-driven passion for continuous learning. And you've seen athletes and people like this. You're probably one of these people because you're here. You want to learn. You want to get better. You take initiative, right? I don't have to get on you to practice. You want it. How much of that is trainable? How much is that innate? Lots of debate about that. For sure, there's a bit of both there. This is an image of Karch Karai. You see him. He's the head coach of the women's national team for U.S. volleyball. Do you think he's excited? He's got his arms up like this. You maybe have had this feeling, right? And maybe it was a youth sport event, but just the feeling of relief and joy, just joy, all the work, all the effort, and to see your athletes perform when it really matters. This was in Italy a few months ago at the World Championship. Actually, it was last year now, at the World Championships. And any ideas how many? There's been 17 World Volleyball Championships for women. Any idea how many the U.S. has won? Who says more than 5? Show of hands. Well, the answer is 1. This was their very first World Championship. They're usually very competitive in volleyball, silver medals, finalists, things like that. Never won a World Championship. Karch Karai was hired just 2 years before they won their first World Championship. And I show this example because a week after they won, I was in a room teaching a coaching session, and who's sitting in the room? Karch Karai. So he was also voted the all-time greatest volleyball player of the 20th century. Olympic gold medalist in beach volleyball, indoor volleyball, collegiate champion. And he's sitting in a classroom listening to me talk about coaching. I thought, okay, we'll see, this will be interesting. But guess what? Who do you think the first person was in line after my talk with a notepad and a pen to ask me a question? The most successful coach in the room. And that says everything right there. Titles don't mean anything. And I've worked with Coach Wooden, John Wooden, I'll talk more about that later. And he used to like to say, everyone is a teacher to someone, right? And so when he was talking to me, and I was asking him more questions than he was asking me, and I thought, wow, this guy lives it. I understand why he's so successful. And one thing that he shared with me is a lot of his philosophy is based around this book he read called Growth Mindset. And you may have seen this book, very popular book now. Coaches love this book, a little paperback book. And really what it is, it's a compilation of 40 years of research by Carol Dweck, a psychologist at Stanford University. And she's not a sports scientist. She doesn't do research in sport, although there are some people who've now started to do that with her. And the idea behind this very simple book, it's a very powerful book, is that the way you give feedback to people and the way you view ability and talent, in a sense, has a very profound effect on how the people you're leading are going to think about themselves and how they're going to respond to feedback and how they're going to act. There's some very powerful, like the worst thing you can ever do with a child is tell them they're smart. In fact, I remember one day we have young children, and my daughter was in grade 2 or 3, I think, and we were meeting with the teacher, and she said, "Oh my gosh, your daughter's so smart." I said, "Don't ever tell her she's smart. Please don't tell her she's smart," because her research shows when you tell people something about fixed ability, you're good, you're smart, you're fast. They embed that as part of who they are. I'm fast. And then guess what? Someone beats them as they move up the chain. And maybe they don't train as much as they should. All of a sudden, I'm not fast. It's not, I didn't work hard enough or I have to train harder. I'm not something I used to be, right? So she distinguishes between what she calls a fixed mindset. So two ways of looking at talent and ability. A fixed mindset, which is this idea that talent is innate in a sense. So it's kind of, you have a fixed amount of talent and you are something, right? And kids get this in school all the time. We do it as coaches at young ages too. And when you have a fixed mindset, your focus really is on proving your ability. So why would I take chances? Why would I take risks, especially in practice? I don't want to look bad, right? But the opposite of that is a growth mindset. The title, one of her key themes, a growth mindset. And the difference here is people with a growth mindset focus on improving ability. It's a subtle but huge difference, huge difference. And there's a lot of research behind this. And so the book is a nice introduction to that material, easy to read. So Karch was telling me that this book had a profound impact on his coaching. Remember, he'd only been coaching the team 2 years. And so he decided that I'm going to build my coaching philosophy around this idea of a growth mindset. And this is a written example of the pillars of his coaching philosophy. And you see the first pillar is growth mindset. And he uses that term with his athletes. And I asked him about the last item under growth mindset, mistakes, ... ugly. I said, what does that mean, mistakes ugly? Like, you don't want to make mistakes because mistakes are ugly? And he said, no. Just the opposite. We want to practice ugly. We want to be making mistakes. I want to see mistakes in the practice. World best athletes in volleyball, he said, if you come and watch one of our practices, you'd be shocked. It's going to look ugly because they're making lots of mistakes. You say, they're world champions? Yes, that's how they got to be world champions, because there's no fear. There's no fear of taking risks and making growing and taking chances. And this is a quote from him: you better be making mistakes in practice or you aren't getting better. I want to see ugly practices. This isn't a place to come and get better at what you're already good at. It's not for, practicing safe. And that's what many people who don't reach their potential do, right? If you let them practice on their own, what do? They practice the things they're really good at, because that feels good. But that's not how you get better, right? And it reminded me of a quote, and Karch Cry played volleyball at UCLA, where Coach Wooden coached, and he definitely has been influenced by him too. And I had a chance, I worked at UCLA before I worked at Fresno State, and I had a chance to interact with Coach and stay involved in projects with him up until the time he passed away recently. And one of his favorite quotes was, what matters most is what you learn after you know it all. And I thought, that's beautiful. That says it all right there. And he won 10 national championships coaching at UCLA, and every year of his career, at the end, whether he won the championship or not, the first thing he did was identify a gap that he wanted to get better at. Even after he won his 9th championship, what do I need to get better at? Your best ever 8 in a row or 7 in a row, I think it was. And the first question he asked at the end of the year is, what can I get better at? And he went out and did a study. He did basically a little research project every year. And this is an image of some of the awards that his teams collected, and he really didn't like this picture. He said, man, I don't like that picture, but I use it for effect. And he didn't like it because it wasn't ever about him, right? He says, the athletes won these trophies, not me, but it was a publicity the university wanted to do. And so while he was still alive, a group of us who had worked with him and were familiar with him, including Swen Nader, who won 2 championships playing for Coach Wooden, and Ron Gallimore, if you've read any of the coaching research, Ron Gallimore did one of the very first coaching studies back in the 1970s, where he went and observed Coach Wooden in his practices. Tharp and Gallimore, a very classic coaching study. And so we started talking. We said, you know what? Coach Wooden has this pyramid of success. And you may have seen this at some point, the pyramid of success. And he created that over many decades as a blueprint for quality performance. So for the athlete, or for the learner, in his case, he called them students. he said, this is what it looks like to be a champion performer. These are the building blocks. And we said, did you ever create one for the coach? What are the building blocks for a great coach? I said, no. So okay, we're going to make one. So what we ended up doing is going back and forth. I would look in the research, and they would send me drafts and check in with coach, and what do you think? Does this seem to fit? So we tried to create a mirror image. So you have his pyramid of success for athletes or performers, and we said, can we create flip it over? What's it look like for the coach? And we published it, and this is what it looks like, and I'm more than happy to share that article with you. If you want that, you can email me. I'll gladly share it. And the reason, I'm going to go into this a little bit more tomorrow, but the reason I bring it up is because it wasn't by design, but when you look at this, and I'm talking about personal mastery, the second level in the pyramid is all personal mastery. We never use the word personal mastery, but it's all personal mastery and growth mindset, right? Being self-directed, taking initiative, being curious as a coach. Essentially, this idea of practicing ugly, self-examination, it's all mastery. So this is what happens when we get in our little silos. If I only read psychology research or biomechanics or business or organizational development, these principles are evident, but we use different terms. Anyways, I'm using personal mastery as an example. So personal mastery, this idea of self-driven passion for continuous learning. So the question I have for you, the pause right now, is how do you respond when you or your athletes make mistakes? This will reveal a lot about your mindset. Take 2 minutes. Okay, we're going to keep moving. Trying to keep the pace a little bit quicker maybe than normal, but we'll have more time for discussion after. So you think about, this is a great way to get insight into mindset, how people respond when they make mistakes. Look at your athletes, right? Do they get really frustrated and angry and disappointed? That's a kind of a fixed mindset because they feel like part of their identity was affected when they make a mistake. But great athletes want the ball again, right? Yeah, it didn't go in, give me the next shot. Let's go, let's try. I'll get it again, I'll get the next one. The third component that I want to share with you, or the third principle, is what I call complex family environment. And this is not my term. This is a term I borrowed from some research, and I'll explain where that idea came from. And what I mean by a complex family environment is this idea of an environment where there's freedom and structure. Seems simple, right? Freedom within structure. And I heard someone once refer to it as a yes-but environment. So ask yourself this, when people come to you, a child, an athlete, a student, says, hey, can we do something? And your first response is, no, we can't do that. Could you change it to yes, but? Yes, but under these conditions, or yes, in this way, or yes, but, and shape it, right? A yes, but environment, freedom with structure. Seems simple, but we don't often do a good job of that. An example of that in action is Phil Jackson, one of our great coaches of the past few decades. And this is also a book that I really enjoyed and coaches really enjoyed. And this is, to me, this is one of the best books I've read by a championship coach explaining very genuinely the messiness of coaching, right? And one of my favorite lines in there, so he won 11 championships coaching 2 different teams, but essentially every year was a different team because players come and go every year. So 11 different teams, 11 championships. And one of my favorite quotes from the book is, he said, sometimes for fun, when I file my taxes under profession, I'll write magician. And, it's messy. It's really, it's really messy, okay? And so he really shared some great details on how he navigated the messiness, right? But he created a complex family environment. He never used that term in the book, but it's exactly what he did, okay? And you see, for him, in practices, it was coach-driven. We're not negotiating what we're going to work on in practice or what system we're going to run or what drills you want to do. You might consider dictatorial in a sense, autocratic, and we say, oh, well, that's not the right way to coach. It isn't if that's all you do, okay? So he balanced that with the games or the competitions were for the players. Practices, structure, freedom, and games. So in games, there's an unwritten rule in professional basketball in the NBA that if your opponent goes on a 7-0 run, you call a timeout. Didn't do that. This is their time. They need to create. They need to improvise. They need to lead. And you see, I love this picture. You see his coaching staff directing and trying to create that structure. He's watching. He's watching. And I have a great image, same idea as Coach Wooden 40 years before that. Practices were run like a military camp. Games for you. And he used to say, I want to be surprised in games. I want to see how they address adversity and the ideas they come up with. So it's freedom in structure. And where'd that idea come from? The best example I've ever seen of this, and it doesn't get cited in coaching research, and I'm always amazed how it's kind of a hidden gem from sports science and coaching. But if you've ever read anything about flow or being in the zone, this is the same guy, Csikszentmihalyi. And he did a study with a group, and they just happened to publish it in a book instead of a research paper. And they looked at teenagers in school settings, and this was going back into the 80s, and some of you may know what that picture is. It's a little pager, a beeper, we used to call them. And the students would wear these, and throughout the day, 8 or 9 times, they'd get paged, and they had a little booklet, and they had to answer a series of questions. Who are you with? How focused are you? How much are you enjoying what you're doing right now? What are you doing right now? Because they believe that environments really had a profound impact on talent development, right? Where and how you spend your time really has a profound impact on your ability to maximize your talent. And sure enough, they did find that. That was the key finding from the research, was that the teenagers, and they were in music and science and sport, and the ones who kind of maximized their talent and did better on many different tasks, spent most of their time in a different kind of environment. And they called it a complex family environment. Complex being, as opposed to simple, complex being there was lots of structure in those environments, but they also had opportunities for autonomy and freedom. And this makes sense. They called it integration and differentiation. But this makes sense if you go deeper into basic psychology research and you look at what drives motivation. There's 3 basic human needs, if you look at self-determination theory, that really drive what we do. We're needs-based. You have a headache, you need an aspirin, right? You're hungry, you need to eat. We're needs-driven. 3 basic human needs. 2 of them are relatedness. So we're tribe-based. Generally, we want to be around people. We want to be part of clubs and teams and groups. But we also want our freedom, right? I want my independence, but I want to be able to be part of the group. So that's how we're wired. And this is what they found. And going right up to today, you still see this, but you don't hear these terms, but you still see this when you look at successful teams. And this is Urban Meyer. He's arguably the most successful coach in the United States at the moment. He's a college football coach. He's won 3 national championships, defending national champion at Ohio State. And we were fortunate in our journal to have a paper just published with him where he explained his leadership approach. And after I read it, I said, this is complex family. He's created a complex family environment. It's exactly what he did, but he didn't call it that. And what he does for his leadership system, it's a graded complex family leadership approach, essentially. So when you come in to his team, you come in as a rookie or a novice into his team, you don't have any freedom. It's all structure. And so you're a blue, you're a child. I mean, these are grown men, 300 pounds, 6'7", but you're a child. You haven't earned freedom yet. You haven't earned autonomy yet. So it's all structure. And we're watching you all the time. And then they have formal graduations throughout the year where players can graduate to a higher level of autonomy, being red or gold, gold being the highest level. And red, you get a little bit of freedom, a little bit more autonomy. Gold, lots of autonomy. You've earned that right to have lots of autonomy within our structure. And he even used the term, when you get to gold, you're a grown-ass man. Like, you have earned that distinction and that privilege. Complex family. And then it got me thinking, because I teach talent development classes and I read lots of different literature, and you may have seen this come out a few years back where it got a lot of media attention. They did some studies and they've replicated this in other countries, but mostly in North America, looking at is there an overrepresentation of professional athletes from small towns? And sure enough, every major sport, including golf and football and hockey and basketball, there's a much higher representation of professional athletes who are born in small towns than in big cities. And so the research kind of ended there. It was very statistical, quantitative, so we didn't know why, but we knew something was different about small towns, growing up in a small town. And the author here, Jean Coté, he and I went to school together, and we were talking about this one time, and I was visiting with him, and he said, yeah, I have a graduate student who grew up in a small town where one high school, 150 students in this little tiny high school, small town, but they win championships every year, in provincial championships. So we're going to go do a study. So they actually went and did a study of this little town out in Canada, Nova Scotia, Lockport, Nova Scotia, and this is the reference, where they went and interviewed coaches, athletes, parents, administrators. What's going on here? Why are you always winning despite having very few resources? What is it about this small town? And guess what? The small town essentially small towns are complex families. In small towns, kids get, in this particular small town, they do have organized sport leagues, they do have teams, so they do get coaching, they do get structure, but they also have fewer opportunities for structured activities. So they have more free time. So they have what we might call more free play. They get to scrimmage, they get to play mixed age games, they get to play outside of formal coached experiences. So it's really deliberate practice and free play, which is essentially support and autonomy, complex family. And you have that right here in New Zealand, because just recently, Tanya Cassidy shared this with me, and we started to write up this paper, this research that they did. So we found the same thing on the other side of the planet, small town, same thing. So yep, complex family right there. So when you think of complex family environment, can you create a complex family environment? Most definitely you can. Freedom within structure. So the next moment I want to give you, a couple minutes, is to reflect on this idea. How well do you think you balance structure or coach-directed activities with athlete-directed activities or athlete choice? If I went and watched a practice, would I see any athlete freedom, choice, autonomy in your practice? Take 1 or 2 minutes on that. We have one last principle to go through. And I hope you do continue to discuss this and think about this and reflect on this as we go through the event and as you go back to your practice. One thing I do when I coach youth sport, always the first 10 minutes of practice is for the kids. It's social time, because kids are coming to practice from school or other events, and now they're with their friends. They want to talk, they want to chat, they want to catch up. So I could start yelling at them, barking at them, and trying to get them to pay attention, and give them 10 minutes, and then get out of their system. That's their time, that's their free time, and it works great. Autonomy and structure. The last principle I want to share with you is what I refer to as authentic learning. And this is a term that I spent a lot of time trying to figure out what's the best term for this. And I think this really captures it, because you're always learning. We're always learning. You're learning right now. But it's not necessarily authentic learning. And this is very important. You see this in the best organizations. So for me, authentic learning is learning that's embedded in your everyday work. It's not going to a clinic, it's not going to a workshop, it's not coming to a conference. This is important, this is very important, but it's not authentic learning, because now you have to take what you're hearing and reading and try and adapt it and apply it back to something you're going to do with your team or with your athletes or in your own life. But what about learning on the job, essentially, right? And we see this all the time as a big issue. For example, in North America, we have in schools 40 years and billions of dollars of research trying to figure out how to make better schools and better teachers. And typically what we do is we assign some professional development days, right? 1 or 2 days a year or a semester where schools close and the teachers get together and they learn. Why would you learn 1 day a year? You should be learning all the time. But we don't give them time to do that, do we? They're so busy teaching. So here you have an image of a Toyota Corolla, and this is the world's all-time #1 selling car. And I share this example with you because Toyota is a classic example and very researched example of a learning organization. And in fact, we can make a connection between Coach John Wooden and Toyota because Coach Wooden served in the Navy in World War II, and the U.S. government implemented a system to ramp up production of equipment during World War II in factories across the nation. And so they tried to standardize and create a system for embedded or authentic learning. We don't have time to train and test people. We have to produce material right now. So you need to be learning as you're doing this, and we need a system for that. Coach Wooden was exposed to that, used those ideas in his coaching, and in fact, after World War II, the U.S. went to Japan, sent a team over to teach Japanese companies how to use that system. They used it, and then they basically took over American productivity, and Toyota became the #1 car company in the world. And then guess what American car companies did? They went over to Japan to learn the Japanese way of management. We taught them back in World War II. Well, I mean, we all learned together, but so there's a connection there. And in fact, what you see when you look at these learning organizations is what we call a PDCA cycle. You may have seen this if you've read business literature. Plan, do, check, act, repeat. Plan, do, check, act, repeat. So it's embedded in everything you do every day. And it's also sometimes referred as the Deming cycle, named after an American organizational psychologist, Edward Deming. And if you look at Toyota's latest version of their symbol, in a sense, it's the plan, do, check PDCA cycle in an image for Toyota, where you have this idea of thinking, the little bubbles above the head, and constant movement through the cycle. So it's PDCA, that's how they really embody what they do, and with great success. And a book that I think you would really enjoy if you're into this is this book called Toyota Kata, and Kata is coaching. It's another word for coaching. So it's a whole very interesting research on how Toyota coaches their people. And really, the way they approach their business is they're not a car company. We build people who happen to build cars. So they coach. Every employee in Toyota, it has a one-to-one peer coaching relationship, every employee. And this is an example of a card that all managers have with them at all times in Toyota. And they walk around the production floor and they're asking these questions. What are we trying to achieve? What's the gap between what we're trying to achieve and what we are achieving? How can we close that gap? When can we go and test the idea and see if it works? Plan, do, check, act, in action. And you see the same thing in the world's best schools. This was a $10 million study where they went into classrooms all over the world to look at what separates great schools and great teachers from less successful schools and teachers. And they really, you see this in Japan and Finland in particular, but Japan is one that there's been a lot of research on this, and they call it lesson study. And we've tried this in other schools in other countries now too, but it's really embedded in the culture of teaching and learning in schools in Japan. And I had a chance to work with Brad Ermeling a little bit. He spent time in Japan, he studied this, and what you find there, as opposed to schools in many other countries where teachers teach all day, and once a semester or once every month they get together in learning teams, or they'll have a professional development day to try and learn and discuss what they're doing. It's embedded in everyday work in the schools in Japan. So teachers plan lessons together. So all the grade 3 teachers or all the math teachers in a school, for example, will plan, but it's not on weekends or in the evenings. They're in the classroom less. They teach less, and they have time dedicated to learning, authentic learning. They plan lessons together. They test them together. So here you have image of, this is a classroom, and you have the other teachers in the school observing the lesson that we co-created that I'm now teaching. Then we debrief it. What worked? What did you notice about the students, about engagement, about the types of questions they asked? What do we have to change? Let's do it. So authentic learning embedded in everyday work. And we did a study. We were fortunate enough to actually have a 10-year study where we had data on a coach who was about to quit, was miserable, losing, just burned out, and decided, I need to do something to get better. Happened to connect with Coach Wooden, and we had data on him over 10 years, and we saw this incremental change where he went from not using an embedded learning approach to using a plan, do, check cycle. And what we found with him, this is him here, Coach Hank Bias, and a picture with him with Coach Wooden. And what we found with him is there's 4 features of reflective practice or authentic learning that really embodied what he did in the transformation that he had. One was you get really good at focusing on things that matter. And as coaches, everything matters, right? Your job's never done. But the best coaches get really good at learning what to ignore. Everything doesn't matter, right? Identify the separators, the high impact performance gaps, okay? Then make detailed action plans on how I'm going to close those gaps, all right? And this is critical. You use evidence to drive the next step. So not opinion, not what you think is happening. I think they got it, or I think they like it, or I think it's working. What evidence do you really have? Quantitative, qualitative evidence. What data do you collect to drive this cycle? All right? And then get busy repeating that cycle, incremental steps. And you see this with all championship teams and great businesses. There's no breakthroughs. There's slow, steady, incremental progress. And then you see, oh, wow, a great breakthrough, but it was many years in the making, right? This is one of my favorite quotes. Think evolution, not revolution. And that sums it up. Think evolution, not revolution. But we do that a lot, don't we? We fire a coach because we want a revolution. New system, new model, new strategy, new philosophy. It doesn't work. Often, typically. I mean, we need to have that legacy of incremental change, right? So when you think of authentic learning, you can think of these examples. How can we embed our learning in our everyday work, all right? I'll give you 1 minute on this, and then I just have one last slide. I'd like you to think about, actually, no, we'll leave you with that one because I'm just about done, so you can discuss this one on your way out. But ask yourself, how do you know if you're doing a good job as a coach? What evidence do you have that you're doing a good job? Other than, obviously, the scoreboard. How do you know if you're doing a good job, right? And so these 4 principles, for the last 5 years, I've been testing these with all different levels of sport and teams, but primarily actually with the high school. 23 different sports, the entire program. We said 750 athletes, 23 sports. Can we create a culture of continuous improvement and excellence across the entire athletics department? And they've been experiencing record participation. Kids are having more fun. They're coming back, and they're winning. And they're winning. If you want to read more about this, this is an article that we just published that summarizes a lot of the science and examples related to this approach and these principles, and we refer to it as a long-term program development approach, kind of as a complement to long-term athlete development, or LTAD, where what we do with LTAD, or what we do with most coach education, we pull the athlete or the coach out of the system, try and educate them, and then try and put them back. But what you really need to do is have that authentic learning and these principles embedded in the entire system. So it's more a systems approach, right? And also, if you are interested to learn more about this material, there's free webinars and free articles that I produce with Human Kinetics Coach Education that's available at any time if you want to learn more about this material or contact me. So thank you very much for your time.